Hi, my name is Noah Meir. I am the CEO of the Charney Forum for New Diplomacy. With us today is Dr. David Milch, physician, producer, and entrepreneur. I'd love for you to share some of your thoughts about media ethics in the day of information age.
There's so much going on. The world is changing. We're all facing challenges. We're facing practical day-to-day challenges. We're facing plan for the future challenges. And we're facing, in many ways, ethical, moral, existential challenges. And there are many challenges that the media has. How to cover events as they occur, how to put them in context. Here in the United States, we have a real schism in the media, as we have a media that's associated with a left or progressive Democrat, one might say. We have media on the other side of the aisle associated with the right, Republican. We have everything in between, but there really has been a polarization. And a lot of the media time is spent pointing fingers at one another rather than coming up with ways to cover the events that need to be covered accurately and objectively, and then to editorialize as needed, but to really characterize as editorialization. Unfortunately, it's like mutual assured destruction. If one side changes the rules or is perceived to change the rules, the other side says, I have to keep up, and then things deteriorate. Generally speaking, I believe that the media writ large is one of the most important and still maintains ethical standards. Things are changing quickly on every front. The concept of ethics and morality doesn't happen overnight. Those sorts of things should take generations. It goes all the way back to, ancient days, the Greeks, in which the foundations of ethics and morality. So what a surprise that institutions, including the media, are struggling. But more than ever, the media plays a mission critical role. Communication plays a mission critical role now that we're all required to self-isolate and are hungry for news. So it's a very important question, deserves to be examined deeply and comprehensively. And hopefully that's part of what the Charney Forum will be in a position to do.
So that leads me very naturally to the next question. With the information overload has become the decade of fake news and post-truth, what some would say. Coronavirus crisis that we're still very much in the midst of. Do you think we're seeing an increase in fake news? Do you think it's something that we're going to see more of as we move forward or less of?
The buzzword is fake news and fake media. What one side's fake is another side's truth, and another side's truth becomes truthiness. And how do you put all that together? How do the pieces fit? And we don't have the answer to that yet. Is there an increase in blatantly false information put out as received wisdom? Absolutely, categorically, yes. There is, and there always has been, lying going on. One has to have context, but there are some things which are black and white. Now we have to get into the nuances, and we don't have the time for that on a day-to-day basis. So we self-segregate into the silos of how we get our information, and that inevitably, puts us on one side or the other of what is fake and what is not fake. Now, when it comes to coronavirus, the political becomes personal, right? And the scientific becomes subject to, unfortunately, debate and interpretation. And when you're dealing with people's lives, not that science has all the answers or that medicine is black and white. The doctor-patient relationship is a relationship. And that requires a finesse, a sense of what information to provide to a patient and when, and to allow the patient to heal themselves. So that relationship isn't just, facts and figures. There's medication, hydroxychloroquine, for example, which for reasons which are political and have to do with communication has been latched onto by some pretty powerful forces as being potentially the answer. However, if one looks objectively at the data, one can't make a statement like that, and it's very dangerous to do so. You get caught between a rock and a hard place of wanting to give people hope in a sense that something is available to be done, but then they get on the bandwagon of, oh, I heard from the president, or I saw this in a tweet, or on WhatsApp, this paper, and people don't have the training in the background to read these papers like someone or have access to true experts. And of course, Those of us that are in the field say, not so fast. Maybe there's something there, but the risks of going too far ahead too fast are far greater potentially. But as soon as you say potentially or could be, now you're telling people that you don't have an answer. When you're in an environment in which there's fear, uncertainty, and doubt, that creates an anxiety situation. And the chemicals that circulate through individuals or families or communities, collective bodies, overwhelm what goes on in the front of our head, our frontal lobe, the objective, data-driven analysis, especially when things are changing. And it's happened so quickly that society has not been able to adjust to it. And institutions, which have the responsibility, governmental institutions, social institutions, are under stress. And again, when things change quickly and there's danger, fear, uncertainty, doubt, anxiety, and people look for simple answers, and they are prey to whatever they heard last or which fits what they want to hear, and then suddenly people are demanding something like hydroxychloroquine or chloroquine with azithromycin, etc. And recent reports show that it can have retinal damage, can have cardiac damage. We just don't know. So we're caught between a rock and a hard place, and it's nobody's fault. We all sort of feel that way, that somebody's been pushing buttons and pulling levers and messing things up, and we want to have someone to point a finger at. We all have to take responsibility for the world that we, maybe not individually, but collectively have created, and come up with innovative answers that are fact-based, that are truth-based, but recognize that as human beings, we're more than just machines. We're more than just data consumers. We have all of this part of us, which is humanity that goes back hundreds of generations.
What do you foresee as some of the potential implications of the coronavirus on diplomacy and globalization?
The short answer is we don't know yet. People are fearful when they're uncertain of the future, when they have doubts, sort of inchoate, existential. They look for simplistic answers because they want an answer now. And that leads historically. We have to learn the lessons of history, which is in times of stress, it becomes easier, and unfortunately sometimes too easy, for authoritarianism to replace consensus building. And again, it's understandable, especially if you see authoritarianism working. You look at China right now, you see a huge country, 1.4, 1.5 billion people, being able to react this quickly because it's authoritarian. And not just, of course, with respect to Corona. One can argue in great detail of whether this is just a passing phenomenon and China will go back to an authoritarian government that isn't very inventive and stifles creativity. Now let's look at a country which has been considered to be the crucible of creativity, Israel, a tiny, tiny country, 7 million people. However, even in Israel, with all of this culture of individualism, we've seen very quickly how the country has responded to the corona situation. Although the politics doesn't go away, we know in the case of the current governing party that there are challenges to the leadership and scandals and so forth. Israel must be able to turn on a dime. And to the credit of the Israeli people in all parts of the political spectrum, they have lined up to support the necessary changes and to self-isolate, and corona seems to be very much under control. Now, could Bibi Netanyahu administration use this opening to cement, in an anti-democratic way, one might say, their position and to bypass accountability for consideration? We don't know. It depends upon how long this crisis lasts. It depends upon what happens around Israel. It depends upon all the unknowns. But here we have two completely different countries which have moved into one fairly would say is a more authoritarian posture and have benefited from it. So what a surprise that similar types of things are already happening in Europe. If you look at Austria and Hungary, these are two countries that have really clamped down in a pretty authoritarian way on movement of people and so forth. Some of this goes to culture. Austria and Hungary. Remember, there was an Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Habsburg Empire. This wasn't that long ago. And things don't change culturally at the community, the family level in 1 or 2 generations. And in the case of Hungary, which is Viktor Orban, has truly seized autocratic powers with the full support of a majority of the population. The intelligentsia has been relatively quiet. Why? Because people feel in times of urgency, we need to line up behind a survival plan. But what happens the day after? Corona will start to fade. Does this authoritarianism now give way to a more democratic, more engaged and even-handed? There's most likely going to be more challenges, whether it has to do with nuclear proliferation, whether it has to do with the rise of technologies. And certainly one of the tools which has enabled China and Israel to respond as quickly as it has are the use of these technologies.
When you look now ahead and you try to assess potential opportunities, what do you identify can be created as a result of the coronavirus?
Crises, by definition, is dangerous, but there are opportunities. And what is the opportunity for the crisis and the danger that Corona has brought to the world? It's to understand how the world is global, whether we like it or not. We can't go back to a pre-industrial age. The arrow of time only goes forward, and our technologies will only continue to become more omnipresent. And our reliance, as the coronavirus has shown, with the shutdown worldwide of the economy, is a global phenomenon. And that's the single most important lesson to learn here, that we have to have mechanisms that are international. The lessons of coronavirus for today's age are, number one, we live in a global world. Number two, we will continue to live in a global world. Number three, given that we live in a global world, what comes next?
What steps do you think we can take as a society in order to increase our resilience at such a time of crisis?
What can we do to reestablish a sense of trust and confidence, resilience, let us say, trust and confidence in leadership, trust and confidence in the ability to respond to crisis situations in a measured and proactive manner, and an understanding that we can't just move on and put it behind us. We have to understand what happened and how to prevent it from happening in the future. So we can't go overboard. We can't be stockpiling every possible piece of medical equipment and personal protective equipment and on, because the next corona-like challenge won't be corona. It'll be something else, and it'll need a different medical and technical response. And the only way to do this efficiently is to have international supply chains and to have mechanisms that can be brought into play quickly. China, in its ability to turn on a dime, noting, of course, that the autocratic nature of the country is not something that is so easily reproduced in other countries. And Israel, a democracy where the country and the population responded to the realities of a threatening situation as they have under different circumstances in the past, and are going to come out of this very much intact. Even if some of or many of the decisions that were made are worthy of applause, the psychological impact that has on neighbors, whether it's in Asia or Israel in the Middle East, where it's, of course, surrounded by a complex mix of geopolitical considerations. This is not the time for chest thumping. What is it? To be humble in victory, to try to take those lessons to make it a wider learning. I hope that's what happens.
What advantage do you think that the Charney Forum for New Diplomacy has as a hybrid of academia and hands-on programming?
The Charney Forum for New Diplomacy has a very important role to play going forward, building upon the legacy of Leon Charney, who I was fortunate to watch his programs growing up. The way that Chile and the forum are building upon Leon's extraordinary role as a commentator and observer of the international scene and as a diplomat, this blended approach of the citizen is necessary. We all have an opportunity to be diplomats in the years to come via what we're doing right now, communicating via these devices, one to many. It's just extraordinary. However, it's so easy for the message to be distorted, and there still needs to be leadership. It has to come through earning the trust and confidence of populations. And I think that that's where important groups like the Charney Forum can play such an important role, defining the mission carefully, executing step by step, being patient, but not being afraid to move forward. No one can change the world. No one can fully heal the world. The world will be what it will be, but we can make an impact in our individual lives and collectively with those that we share with. And I feel privileged to be able to share with you today, Noah, and the extended family that we're part of.